Welcome to Caveman Stories. Tonight, we're traveling back 25,000 years to the heart of the Ice Age, when our ancestors faced minus 40-degree temperatures and a simple choice: master the cold or die. Over the next 2 hours, we'll discover how our ancestors survived the Ice Age through fierce determination and incredible resilience. Before we settle into tonight's long journey back through time, I just want to thank you for being here. Wherever in the world you are, I'd love to know what time it is for you right now and where you're listening from. Drop a comment down below. And if you enjoy this kind of quiet exploration, it really helps to like the video and subscribe. The Earth has tilted away from the sun, and darkness settles like a heavy blanket across the northern hemisphere. It is 25,000 years ago, deep in the last glacial maximum, and the world has become a place of endless cold. Glaciers stretch for thousands of miles across what will one day become Europe and North America, their ice sheets towering 2 miles high in places, grinding forward at a pace so slow it seems eternal, yet so relentless it reshapes entire continents. For months at a time, the sun barely climbs above the horizon, casting only a pale gray light across snow-covered landscapes. In these high latitudes where our Paleolithic ancestors lived, winter nights can last 18 hours or more. Temperatures plummet to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes, and turn breath into crystals that fall with the sound of tiny bells hitting stone. In this world of perpetual winter, humans have learned to read the subtle languages of survival. They know that certain winds carry the scent of approaching storms days before the first snowflakes fall. They understand that the quality of smoke from their fires can predict whether the cold will deepen or ease. They have memorized the positions of stars that guide them through the polar night, and they can distinguish between the howl of hungry wolves and the distant crack of shifting ice. But beyond these practical skills lies something deeper: the psychological endurance needed to face months of darkness. Archaeological evidence from sites like Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic reveals that these people didn't merely survive winter, they created elaborate cultural responses to it. Ivory figurines carved with intricate detail, ochre paintings on cave walls, and carefully arranged burial sites all speak to minds that remained active and creative even in the depths of the coldest season. The silence of the winter landscape could be overwhelming. Modern humans, accustomed to constant noise, can barely imagine the profound quiet of an Ice Age winter night. The only sounds would be the crack of shifting ice, the whisper of wind through naked branches, and perhaps the distant howl of a wolf pack moving across the frozen steppes. This silence wasn't empty. It was full of meaning. Every sound carried information. The snap of a branch might signal an approaching mammoth herd or a rival band of humans. The absence of bird calls could mean predators were near. In this environment, human groups learned to create their own sounds of comfort. Archaeological evidence suggests they developed early forms of music, using hollow bones as flutes and animal hides stretched over frames as drums. These weren't mere entertainment, they were psychological survival tools, ways to break the oppressive silence and bind communities together during the hardest months. The cold itself became a teacher. It taught patience, as rapid movements could lead to frostbite or exhaustion in the thin air. It taught cooperation, as individual survival became impossible without the warmth and resources of the group. Most importantly, it taught innovation. Faced with temperatures that could kill, humans developed the first sophisticated clothing, learned to build insulated shelters, and mastered the controlled use of fire in ways that would become the foundation of all future technology. Winter nights in the Paleolithic weren't just about enduring until dawn. They stretched on for months, creating a rhythm of life utterly different from our modern experience. Families would cluster together in caves or constructed shelters, sharing not just physical warmth, but stories, knowledge, and emotional support that made the darkness bearable. Children learned the skills they would need by listening to elders recount successful hunts and dangerous encounters. Adults planned for spring while repairing tools and crafting new ones. The very structure of Paleolithic society was shaped by winter's demands. Groups that survived were those that had learned to balance individual needs with collective survival. Sharing wasn't just generosity. It was a survival strategy that ensured everyone had enough calories to maintain body heat and enough protection to see spring return. As we follow our ancestors through these frozen months, we begin to understand that the Ice Age winter wasn't just something they endured. It was something that made them human in ways we still recognize today. The capacity for long-term planning, the bonds of family and community, the drive to create beauty even in harsh circumstances, and the ability to find hope in the promise of eventual warmth. All these fundamental human traits were forged in the crucible of Ice Age winters. Beyond the protective glow of the fire, yellow eyes reflect the flickering light. The winter landscape of the Pleistocene was not empty. It was full of hunters far more dangerous than humans. Creatures perfectly adapted to the cold that could kill a person in seconds. Cave lions, larger than any big cat alive today, weighed up to 700 pounds and hunted in coordinated packs across the frozen steppes. Dire wolves, with bone-crushing jaws and thick winter coats, moved in groups of 30 or more, their howls echoing across miles of snow-covered terrain. For our Paleolithic ancestors, nightfall brought a shift in the balance of power. During daylight hours, humans with their spears, coordinated hunting strategies, and fire could compete with most predators. But darkness belonged to creatures with night vision, powerful muscles, and hunting instincts honed over millions of years of evolution. The cave lion's roar could be heard from 5 miles away, a sound that would freeze the blood of anyone who understood what it meant. Archaeological evidence from sites like Atapuerca in Spain shows clear signs of predator activity around human habitation areas. Scratch marks on cave walls made by claws, gnawed bones bearing the distinctive tooth marks of hyenas, and human remains showing evidence of predator attacks all tell the same story. Humans shared their world with creatures that saw them as prey. The spotted hyena of the Ice Age was particularly dangerous, larger and more aggressive than its modern African relative, weighing up to 220 pounds, with jaws capable of crushing mammoth bones. These scavengers would follow human hunting parties, waiting for the opportunity to steal kills or attack isolated individuals. Their distinctive laughing calls served as a warning to humans that they were being watched and followed. But perhaps no predator shaped human behavior more than the short-faced bear, a massive creature that stood 6 feet tall at the shoulder and could weigh over 1,500 pounds. Unlike modern bears, which are largely omnivorous, the short-faced bear was primarily a carnivore, with long legs built for running down prey across open terrain. Its presence in fossil records near human sites suggests encounters that would have been terrifying beyond our modern comprehension. Human responses to these threats shaped the very foundations of our social behavior. Groups developed elaborate watching systems, with individuals taking turns staying alert through the night while others slept. The person on watch wasn't just looking for predators. They were maintaining the fire, listening for unusual sounds, and ensuring that the barriers of light and heat that protected the group remained strong. Cave selection became a matter of life and death. The ideal shelter needed multiple exit routes in case of attack, walls too high for predators to easily leap, and narrow entrances that could be defended by a few people with spears. Many caves show evidence of modifications made by human inhabitants. Stones rolled into position to block secondary entrances, wooden stakes sharpened and placed to create primitive barriers, and fire hearths positioned to provide maximum visibility of potential approach routes. The psychological impact of living under constant threat of predation cannot be overstated. Modern sleep studies have shown that humans retain ancient patterns of light sleeping during certain hours, brief periods of waking to assess danger, and increased alertness to sounds during the night. These patterns, still present in our biology today, were survival mechanisms developed during thousands of years of sharing the landscape with powerful predators. Group dynamics also evolved in response to predator pressure. Larger groups were safer, but they also consumed more resources and were easier for predators to track. Smaller groups could hide more effectively, but were more vulnerable to attack. The optimal group size, around 15 to 25 individuals, represented a balance between safety and sustainability that had life or death implications. Human technology adapted to the predator threat as well. The development of longer, more effective spears allowed hunters to keep dangerous animals at a distance. The creation of noisemakers from animal bones and hide could scare away some predators, while the strategic use of fire could create barriers that even the largest carnivores would hesitate to cross. But perhaps most importantly, the presence of predators drove the development of human social bonds. Trust became essential. You had to know that the person beside you would share the watch, would wake you if danger approached, and would fight beside you if attack came. These bonds, forged in the crucible of shared danger, became the foundation of human cooperation and the social structures that would eventually build civilizations. The relationship wasn't entirely one-sided, however. Humans learned to follow predators to fresh kills, scavenging meat and bones while the primary hunters rested. They observed predator behavior to understand weather patterns, migration routes, and the location of game animals. In time, some predators, particularly wolves, would begin the long process of domestication that would transform them into humanity's first non-human partners. As winter nights stretched on, the balance between humans and predators played out in countless small encounters. A glimpse of eyes reflecting firelight, the sound of claws on stone, the distant howl that made everyone move closer to the fire. These moments shaped our ancestors' understanding of their place in the world and drove them to develop the technologies, social structures, and survival strategies that would carry our species through the Ice Age and beyond. Lightning splits the gray sky above the frozen steppes, and for a brief moment, the world is illuminated in stark white. The thunder that follows shakes the ground, but it's not the sound that captures human attention. It's the sight of flames beginning to dance among the dry grasses where the lightning struck. This is how fire first came to human hands, not through invention, but through the careful observation and preservation of nature's own gift. Archaeological evidence from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa suggests that humans have been using fire for over 1 million years. But controlling and creating it consistently took much longer to master. In the harsh world of the Pleistocene, fire wasn't just useful, it was the difference between life and death. The ability to capture and maintain flame represented one of the greatest technological leaps in human history. The first firekeepers were opportunists and conservationists. When lightning ignited grasslands, or when volcanic activity created natural flames, these early humans would venture into the smoky aftermath with crude containers made from hollowed gourds, large shells, or tightly woven baskets lined with clay. They learned to identify the perfect coals, not too hot to handle, but still glowing with enough life to survive transport back to camp. The preservation of these precious embers required innovation that went far beyond simply carrying glowing coals. Humans discovered that certain materials could sustain low-temperature combustion for extended periods. Dried fungus, particularly the tinder polypore that grows on birch trees, could smolder for hours when wrapped carefully in bark and moss. Charcoal made from specific hardwoods could maintain heat for days if buried in sand and ash. At sites like Gesher Benot Yaakov in Israel, archaeologists have uncovered hearths dating back 790,000 years, with evidence of sustained fire use over thousands of years. The ash layers tell stories of human innovation, different types of fuel tried and tested, hearth designs modified and improved, and fire management techniques passed down through generations. The spiritual significance of fire emerged alongside its practical applications. To possess flame was to hold a piece of the sun's power, to control something that seemed divine in its ability to transform, purify, and sustain life. Many indigenous cultures worldwide still maintain traditions that view fire as sacred, a force that connects the earthly world with the celestial realm. These beliefs likely have roots stretching back to humanity's earliest encounters with controlled flame. Creating fire from scratch represented an even greater challenge than preserving it. The friction method, using a bow drill or fire plow to generate enough heat to ignite tinder, required not just technique but deep understanding of materials. Different woods produced different qualities of ember. The dryness of the tinder, the speed of the drilling, even the humidity of the air all affected success or failure. Humans learned to read the subtle signs that indicated the right conditions for fire making. They could judge the moisture content of wood by its color and the sound it made when struck. They understood which types of bark made the best kindling and which dried grasses caught flame most easily. This wasn't just practical knowledge. It was a complex understanding of chemistry and physics developed through countless hours of experimentation. The pyrite and flint method, striking iron-rich rocks against flint to create sparks, offered another path to flame, but required even more specialized knowledge. Not all stones would work. The pyrite had to be of the right composition, the flint properly shaped, and the tinder carefully prepared to catch the tiny sparks and nurture them into flame. Fire-making became a communal activity that strengthened social bonds. While one person worked the bow drill, others would prepare tinder, shield the work from wind, and breathe gently on the first wisps of smoke. The moment when tinder finally caught fire was celebrated not just as a practical success, but as a triumph over the forces of darkness and cold. The knowledge of fire-making was precious beyond measure, carefully guarded and passed down through apprenticeship systems that ensured the skills would survive even if individuals perished. Elders who could reliably create fire in difficult conditions held positions of respect and authority. Their expertise could mean the difference between group survival and extinction during the harshest winters. Fire changed human biology as much as human culture. Cooked food provided more calories with less energy expenditure for digestion, allowing for smaller teeth and jaws while supporting the growth of larger, more energy-hungry brains. The ability to extend the day through artificial light changed sleep patterns and social interactions in ways that still influence human behavior. But perhaps most importantly, fire gave humans the power to reshape their environment rather than simply adapting to it. They could clear land, drive away predators, cook previously inedible plants, and create tools through heat treatment. Fire transformed humans from creatures subject to the whims of nature into active agents capable of changing the world around them. As the flames dance higher and the warmth spreads through the winter shelter, we begin to understand that fire was more than humanity's first technology. It was the spark that ignited our transformation from clever animals into the masters of our environment. The darkness beyond the cave mouth is absolute, and somewhere in that blackness, something large is moving. Heavy footsteps crunch through the snow, and the sound of sniffing carries on the cold air. A cave bear, perhaps, or something worse. But between the humans huddled in the depths of the cave and whatever lurks outside, a wall of flame dances and crackles, throwing orange light against stone walls and creating a barrier that no predator will willingly cross. Fire as protection transformed the relationship between humans and the dangerous world around them. While other animals fled from flame or learned to avoid it, humans embraced it as their most powerful ally. Archaeological evidence from sites like Lazaret Cave in France shows hearths deliberately positioned near cave entrances, not for cooking or warmth, but as defensive barriers against the creatures that ruled the night. The psychological power of fire was as important as its physical deterrent effect. Most predators had an instinctual fear of flame, passed down through millions of years of evolution during which fire meant destruction and death. Even the largest cave lions would hesitate before crossing a line of dancing flames, their night vision actually working against them as the bright light destroyed their ability to see clearly into the shadows beyond. Humans learned to use this advantage strategically. They discovered that certain materials created flames that burned higher and brighter, more effective at intimidating potential threats. Resinous woods from pine trees produced towering flames that could be seen and smelled from great distances. Animal fat, when added to fires, created intense heat and dramatic flares that could startle even the boldest predators. The management of defensive fires required constant attention and specialized knowledge. These weren't cooking fires that could be allowed to burn down to coals. They needed to maintain visible flames throughout the dangerous hours of darkness. This meant feeding them regularly with carefully prepared fuel, adjusting their size based on wind conditions, and ensuring they never burned so hot that they consumed all available fuel too quickly. At Kesem Cave in Israel, archaeologists have found evidence of multiple hearths used simultaneously, creating a network of fires that provided protection from all angles. The arrangement suggests a sophisticated understanding of how fire could be used tactically, with some hearths serving as primary barriers, while others remained ready to be quickly enlarged if threats approached from unexpected directions. The smell of smoke also served as a form of chemical communication with potential predators. Most dangerous animals associated the scent of wood smoke with human presence and learned to avoid areas where it was detected. This created a kind of olfactory territory marker, expanding the safe zone around human habitation far beyond the visual range of the flames themselves. Fire also enabled humans to venture into previously dangerous areas. Caves that had been dens for bears or lions could be claimed by humans if they could establish and maintain sufficient flame barriers at the entrances. Deep cave systems that would have been death traps in darkness became viable shelters when lit by torchlight and protected by fire barriers. The technology of portable fire, torches that could be carried while moving, revolutionized human mobility during dangerous periods. These weren't simple burning sticks, but carefully constructed tools made from bundled grasses, soaked in animal fat, wrapped around wooden handles, and designed to burn steadily while being carried. A group of humans with torches could travel safely through terrain that would have been impassable in darkness. The defensive use of fire also drove innovations in group organization and cooperation. Maintaining protective fires required coordination. Someone always had to be awake and alert, ready to add fuel or reposition burning materials. This created the first systematic approaches to shared responsibility, with individuals taking turns at fire-tending duties that could mean the difference between group survival and catastrophe. Women, children, and elders who might not have been effective in direct combat with predators found crucial roles as firekeepers. The knowledge of how to maintain flames under difficult conditions, when fuel was scarce, when wind threatened to extinguish fires, when rain or snow made kindling wet, became specialized expertise that was valued and respected within the group. Fire barriers also provided psychological benefits for humans themselves. The knowledge that a wall of flame stood between the group and the dangers of the night allowed for more restful sleep and reduced the stress that constant vigilance would otherwise have created. This improved rest translated into better health, clearer thinking, and more effective survival strategies. The strategic use of fire began to change the behavior of predator populations as well. Areas with consistent human fire use became less attractive to dangerous animals, gradually shifting predator territories and creating safer zones where human populations could grow and develop more complex cultural practices. But fire as a shield was more than just a survival tool. It was humanity's first declaration of independence from the natural order. While every other species accepted the night as the domain of predators, humans refused to yield. They claimed the darkness as their own territory, using flame to carve out islands of safety in a hostile world. As the fire burns through another Ice Age night, casting its protective glow across the sleeping forms of our ancestors, we see the beginning of a relationship between humans and flame that would eventually reshape the entire planet. The shield of fire that protected a small band of hunters in a Paleolithic cave was the same force that would one day power steam engines, forge steel, and launch rockets into space. At the heart of every Paleolithic shelter, whether cave or constructed hut, lay the hearth, a carefully prepared circle of stones arranged to contain flame and channel heat with maximum efficiency. These weren't random assemblages of rocks, but precisely engineered systems that represented thousands of years of accumulated knowledge about fire management, heat distribution, and smoke control. Archaeological excavations reveal hearth designs so sophisticated that they rival modern fireplace engineering principles. The selection of hearth stones required specialized knowledge. Certain types of rock would crack or explode when heated, sending dangerous fragments flying. Others absorbed heat slowly and released it gradually, extending the warming effect long after the flames died down. Humans learned to identify sandstone and granite that could withstand repeated heating and cooling cycles, and they often transported these materials over considerable distances to ensure their hearths would function safely and efficiently. At the Dolní Věstonice site in the Czech Republic, archaeologists have uncovered hearths with elaborate stone arrangements that show clear evidence of repeated use over hundreds of years. The ash layers are many feet deep in some areas, indicating that the same fire locations were maintained by generation after generation of inhabitants. This continuity suggests that hearth construction and maintenance represented crucial cultural knowledge passed down through families. The positioning of hearths within shelters followed principles that maximized both safety and effectiveness. Too close to the cave wall, and smoke would accumulate dangerously. Too far from sleeping areas, and precious heat would be wasted. The optimal location balanced heat distribution, smoke management, and protection from wind drafts that could scatter sparks or extinguish flames at critical moments. Smoke management was particularly sophisticated. Humans discovered that certain arrangements of stones could create natural chimneys, channeling smoke upward and out of living spaces while retaining heat. They learned to identify caves with natural air circulation patterns that would carry smoke away without creating dangerous backdrafts. In constructed shelters, they built deliberate ventilation systems using arrangements of hides and wooden poles. The fuel used in hearths was selected not just for heat output, but for burning characteristics that supported different activities. Hardwoods like oak and birch produced long-lasting coals perfect for overnight heating, while softer woods created quick, hot flames ideal for cooking. Certain plants and fungi were burned for their aromatic properties, both to improve the smell of enclosed spaces and for perceived medicinal benefits. Around the central hearth, family life organized itself in patterns that would remain recognizable for thousands of years. The warmest spots, closest to the fire but protected from sparks, were reserved for children and elders. Adults arranged themselves in a circle that allowed everyone to benefit from the heat, while maintaining easy access to tools, food, and other necessities. The rhythm of hearth maintenance created the basic schedule of Paleolithic life. Someone always had to tend the fire, adding fuel, adjusting the arrangement of burning materials, and banking coals to ensure they would survive until morning. This responsibility rotated among group members, creating shared duties that strengthened social bonds and ensured survival knowledge was widely distributed. Archaeological evidence suggests that hearths served purposes beyond heating and cooking. Many show signs of being used for tool maintenance, heating stone points for sharpening, softening wooden handles for reshaping, and hardening wooden spear tips through careful charring. The controlled heat of a well-managed hearth provided the precise temperatures needed for these crucial tasks. The symbolic importance of the hearth extended far beyond its practical functions. In many cultures, the central fire represented the heart of the home, the sacred center around which family life revolved. Evidence from burial sites suggests that some individuals were interred near hearths, possibly indicating beliefs about the connection between fire and the spirit world. Children learned essential life skills by observing and participating in hearth activities. They watched adults select and prepare fuel, learned to recognize different types of flames and what they indicated about fire health, and gradually took on responsibilities for fire maintenance. This hands-on education ensured that crucial survival knowledge was passed down effectively through generations. The heat distribution patterns created by well-designed hearths influenced sleeping arrangements in ways that maximized warmth conservation. Bodies were positioned to take advantage of reflected heat from stones while avoiding direct exposure to flames. Bedding materials were arranged to channel warm air while providing insulation from cold stone floors. Different hearth designs emerged for different purposes. Summer fires were smaller and positioned for cooking and light rather than heating. Winter hearths were larger, designed to burn continuously, and often built with reflector stones that bounced heat back into living spaces. Specialized hearths for food preservation used controlled smoking techniques that prevented spoilage while adding flavor. The social dynamics around the hearth created the first human communities in the modern sense. Families gathered here not just for warmth, but to share food, exchange information, and strengthen the bonds that made group survival possible. The conversations held around Paleolithic hearths were humanity's first schools, governments, and cultural institutions all combined into one. As the flames dance and the carefully arranged stones and warmth spreads through the winter shelter, we see that the hearth was more than a survival tool. It was the foundation of human civilization, the gathering place where our ancestors first learned to live together, share resources, and create the social structures that would eventually build cities and nations. The mammoth falls with an earth-shaking thud, its massive bulk steaming in the frigid air as the hunting party stands victorious around their prize. But for these Paleolithic people, the real work is just beginning. Every part of this creature, weighing up to 12,000 pounds and standing 11 feet tall, represents life-sustaining resources that will mean the difference between surviving the winter and perishing in the cold. Most importantly, the thick, fur-covered hide will soon become clothing sophisticated enough to keep humans warm in temperatures that would kill other primates in minutes. The processing of mammoth hide was a complex operation requiring specialized tools, techniques, and knowledge accumulated over generations. Using stone scrapers with carefully napped edges, the hunters would begin the painstaking process of removing every trace of fat and flesh from the inside of the hide. This work had to be done quickly. In sub-freezing temperatures, the hide would freeze solid, making it impossible to work with until it could be thawed near a fire. Archaeological evidence from sites like Sungir in Russia reveals the sophistication of Paleolithic clothing technology. Burials dating back 34,000 years contain individuals wearing garments made from thousands of carefully sewn ivory beads and fox teeth, indicating that clothing had evolved far beyond simple protection from the elements to become a form of artistic expression and social signaling. The tanning process transformed raw hide into flexible, durable leather that could be worn comfortably against the skin. Brain tanning, using enzymes from the animal's own brain to break down proteins in the hide, created leather that remained supple even in extreme cold. The process required skill and timing. Too little processing, and the hide would remain stiff and crack in cold weather. Too much, and it would become weak and tear under stress. Bone needles discovered at Paleolithic sites show evidence of sophisticated sewing techniques. These weren't crude piercing tools, but carefully shaped implements with eyes designed to hold sinew thread and points sharp enough to penetrate thick hide without creating large holes that would compromise the garment's insulation properties. The creation of these needles required advanced napping skills and understanding of bone structure. The design of Paleolithic clothing followed principles of layered insulation that wouldn't be improved upon until modern synthetic materials were developed. Inner garments made from soft, thin leather provided a barrier against the skin while wicking moisture away from the body. Middle layers used thicker hide or fur to trap insulating air. Outer garments were made from the heaviest, most weather-resistant materials available, often with the fur left on for additional warmth. Footwear represented perhaps the greatest challenge in Paleolithic clothing technology. Feet were constantly in contact with frozen ground, ice, and snow, making them vulnerable to frostbite and injury. Archaeological evidence suggests boots made from animal hide, wrapped around the foot and lower leg, stuffed with dried grass or fur for insulation, and secured with leather thongs. These primitive boots had to be waterproof enough to keep feet dry, while flexible enough to allow for natural movement over rough terrain. The social aspects of clothing production created some of humanity's first specialized labor systems. While hunting was primarily a male activity, hide processing and garment construction were often dominated by women, whose smaller hands and greater dexterity made them particularly effective at the detailed work of sewing and finishing. Children learned these skills through observation and practice, gradually taking on more complex tasks as they developed the necessary expertise. Different types of fur provided different insulation properties, and Paleolithic people became expert at matching materials to specific uses. Reindeer fur, with its hollow hairs that trap air efficiently, was prized for outer garments. Bear fur, thick and durable, was used for sleeping robes and winter capes. Wolf fur, with its natural water resistance, became ideal for hoods and outer layers that would be exposed to snow and ice. The psychological impact of effective clothing cannot be overstated. The confidence that came from knowing your body was protected from the killing cold allowed for more effective hunting, longer journeys, and greater exploration of new territories. Groups with superior clothing technology had significant survival advantages over those with less effective protection. Clothing also served important social functions within Paleolithic groups. Decorative elements, beads, painted designs, specially treated furs, indicated status, group membership, and individual identity. The investment of time and resources required to create elaborate garments meant they were often passed down through families, becoming some of humanity's first heirloom possessions. Maintenance and repair of clothing was a constant necessity. Garments subjected to the harsh conditions of Ice Age life required frequent patching, resewing, and replacement of worn components. This ongoing work created additional opportunities for social interaction and skill sharing, as individuals with particular expertise in repair techniques could provide services to others in exchange for food or other resources. The portability of clothing was crucial for nomadic groups that followed game animals across vast distances. Unlike shelters, which had to be abandoned when groups moved, clothing traveled with its owners, providing consistent protection regardless of location. This portability made human expansion into new territories possible, as groups could carry their survival technology with them into unknown regions. As our ancestors wrapped themselves in layers of carefully prepared hide and fur, we see the emergence of technology that freed humans from the biological limitations of their tropical origins. Through skill, innovation, and countless hours of careful work, they transformed the harsh Ice Age environment from an insurmountable obstacle into a landscape they could not only survive in, but thrive and multiply across. When natural caves were scarce, and the wind howled across open steppes where no rock overhangs offered protection, humans faced their greatest architectural challenge: building shelters that could withstand Arctic conditions using only materials they could gather, hunt, or salvage from the landscape. The solutions they developed represent some of humanity's first exercises in engineering, creating structures so effective that their basic principles still inform cold weather construction today. The mammoth bone huts of Eastern Europe stand as perhaps the most impressive example of Paleolithic architecture. At sites like Mezherish in Ukraine, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of dwellings built entirely from the bones of woolly mammoths, structures so substantial that they were used repeatedly over hundreds of years. These weren't simple lean-tos, but carefully engineered buildings with walls, roofs, and sophisticated ventilation systems. The construction of a mammoth bone hut required advanced planning and specialized knowledge. Builders had to understand load distribution, wind resistance, and thermal dynamics to create structures that would remain stable through fierce winter storms while maintaining livable temperatures inside. The largest bones, skulls weighing up to 220 pounds and tusks extending 10 feet in length, served as the primary structural framework, while smaller bones filled gaps and provided additional stability. Archaeological evidence suggests these huts were built using interlocking construction techniques that distributed weight evenly and prevented collapse under snow loads. Tusks were carefully positioned to create curved doorways that could be sealed with hide coverings, while the dome-like arrangement of skull bones formed walls that shed wind efficiently while maintaining structural integrity. The engineering behind these structures is remarkable. Builders understood that circular or oval shapes were more stable than rectangular ones, distributing stress evenly around the perimeter. They knew that entrances should face away from prevailing winds, that the highest point should be offset from the center to encourage heat circulation, and that gaps between bones should be small enough to seal effectively while large enough to allow for thermal expansion and contraction. Inside these bone huts, sophisticated heating systems were installed. Central hearths were positioned to maximize heat distribution while minimizing smoke accumulation. Stone-lined fire pits were surrounded by reflector arrangements that bounced heat back into the living space, while carefully planned ventilation holes allowed smoke to escape without creating dangerous drafts that could extinguish fires. When mammoth bones weren't available, humans turned to other materials with equal ingenuity. Wooden frame structures used techniques that wouldn't have been out of place in medieval timber construction. Posts were set into the ground for stability. Cross beams were lashed together with plant fibers or sinew, and the entire framework was covered with layered hides that provided insulation and weather protection. The hide covering systems were engineering marvels in their own right. Multiple layers provided different functions. Outer covers shed rain and snow, middle layers trapped insulating air, and inner linings prevented drafts while allowing moisture to escape. The attachment systems used bone pins, wooden toggles, and carefully tied thongs that could be adjusted based on weather conditions. Snow construction techniques that wouldn't be perfected by Arctic peoples until thousands of years later were already being developed by Ice Age humans. Archaeological evidence suggests that snow was used not just as insulation, but as a construction material, packed into walls and shaped into windbreaks that complemented other shelter materials. The interior layout of these shelters reflected sophisticated understanding of heat dynamics and social organization. Sleeping areas were positioned to take maximum advantage of heat sources while remaining protected from sparks and smoke. Storage areas were placed in the cooler sections where food would remain frozen naturally. Work areas were positioned near light sources and ventilation to make tool-making and hide processing activities more effective. Drainage systems were built into many shelters to handle melting snow and ice. Stone-lined channels directed water away from living areas, while elevated sleeping platforms kept occupants dry during thaw periods. These systems required understanding of basic hydrology and considerable labor investment, but were essential for maintaining healthy living conditions. Multi-room concepts began to emerge in some of the larger structures. Evidence from sites in Siberia suggests partitioned areas within single shelters, with different spaces serving different functions. Sleeping areas, food storage, tool-making workshops, and ceremonial spaces. This compartmentalization represents an early form of architectural planning that would become increasingly sophisticated over time. The social organization required to build these shelters was as impressive as the engineering. Construction required coordinated effort from multiple individuals with different skills. Some specialized in bone selection and positioning, others in hide preparation and attachment, still others in hearth construction and ventilation system installation. The knowledge required was extensive and had to be passed down through apprenticeship systems that ensured these crucial skills would survive even if individual experts perished. Maintenance of these structures was an ongoing responsibility that strengthened community bonds. Hide coverings needed regular replacement, bone frameworks required periodic reinforcement, and heating systems demanded constant adjustment and repair. Groups that successfully maintained their shelters through multiple winter seasons had significant survival advantages over those whose structures failed during critical periods. The innovation didn't stop with basic construction. Evidence from various sites shows experimental approaches to shelter building. Attempts to create better insulation, more effective heating, improved ventilation, and stronger structural frameworks. Some experiments failed, leaving archaeological traces of abandoned or partially completed structures. Others succeeded and became part of the accumulated knowledge that made human survival possible in the harshest environments on Earth. These Paleolithic architects were solving problems that wouldn't be formally addressed by engineering until thousands of years later. They understood thermal bridging and created insulation gaps to prevent heat loss. They knew about wind loading and designed structures that could flex without breaking. They recognized the importance of moisture control and built systems that prevented dangerous condensation accumulation. As families gather inside these ingeniously constructed shelters, warm and protected while fierce winds howl across the frozen landscape outside, we witness humanity's first triumph over architectural challenges that had previously made vast regions of the Earth uninhabitable. The knowledge and skills developed by these Ice Age engineers laid the foundation for all subsequent human construction technology. In the grip of an Ice Age winter, when temperatures plummet to -40 degrees Fahrenheit and snow covers every edible plant for months at a time, the human body becomes a furnace that demands constant fuel to maintain the internal heat necessary for survival. But not just any fuel will do. Surviving in extreme cold requires specific types of food that provide the dense calories and particular nutrients needed to keep metabolism high and body temperature stable through the long, dark months ahead. Archaeological evidence from sites across Europe and Asia reveals that Paleolithic people understood the nutritional requirements for cold weather survival with remarkable precision. Bone analysis from human remains shows diets extraordinarily rich in animal fats and proteins, with fat comprising up to 60% of total caloric intake during winter months. This wasn't simply a matter of eating what was available, it was a sophisticated understanding of how the human body generates heat and what kinds of food provide the most efficient fuel for that process. The mammoth, weighing up to 12,000 pounds when fully grown, represented the ultimate winter food resource. A single successful mammoth hunt could provide a small band with enough meat and fat to last for months. But processing and preserving such an enormous amount of food required advanced techniques and careful planning. The fat layer beneath a mammoth's skin could be 6 inches thick, providing thousands of pounds of pure energy that could be rendered, stored, and consumed throughout the winter. Rendering mammoth fat was a complex process that required precise temperature control and timing. The fat had to be heated enough to liquefy and separate from tissue, but not so hot that it burned and became inedible. Archaeological hearths show evidence of specialized fat rendering operations, with stone-lined pits designed to maintain steady, controlled temperatures over extended periods. The rendered fat was stored in containers made from animal bladders or sections of intestine, creating portable energy reserves that could sustain individuals during long hunting trips or periods when fresh food was unavailable. Bone marrow represented another crucial cold weather food source, providing both fat and essential nutrients that prevented deficiency diseases during months when fresh plant foods were unavailable. The extraction of marrow required specialized tools and techniques. Bones had to be cracked open in ways that preserved the maximum amount of nutritious marrow while creating fragments that could be used for tool making or other purposes. Fish provided a reliable protein source in regions where rivers and lakes remained unfrozen or where ice fishing was possible. Cold water fish like salmon and trout were particularly valuable because their high fat content made them excellent fuel for maintaining body heat. Archaeological evidence from sites near water sources shows elaborate fish processing areas where catches were cleaned, filleted, and prepared for smoking or freeze-drying. The smoking and preservation of meat and fish required sophisticated understanding of food chemistry and bacterial control. Smoke from specific types of wood provided both flavor and antimicrobial compounds that prevented spoilage. Temperature and humidity had to be carefully controlled. Too much heat, and the food would cook rather than preserve. Too little and dangerous bacteria could develop. Freeze-drying, a technique that wouldn't be scientifically understood until modern times, was practiced by Ice Age peoples who recognized that meat left in specific cold, dry conditions would preserve indefinitely while retaining most of its nutritional value. Natural refrigeration in permafrost areas allowed for long-term food storage that could sustain groups through extended periods of scarcity. The gathering and processing of plant foods during brief summer months was crucial for winter nutrition. Nuts, seeds, and dried berries provided essential vitamins and minerals that prevented scurvy and other deficiency diseases. These foods were carefully processed, stored in waterproof containers, and rationed throughout the winter to ensure adequate nutrition even when fresh foods were completely unavailable. Root vegetables that could be stored in frozen ground provided carbohydrates and nutrients during the darkest months. Groups learned to identify and harvest plants like wild onions, roots, and tubers that would remain edible after months of frozen storage. The knowledge of which plants were safe to eat after freezing and which became toxic was literally a matter of life and death. The timing of meals was adjusted to maximize warmth generation throughout the day. Large, fat-rich meals were consumed before sleep to provide sustained heat generation through the night. Smaller, more frequent meals during active periods ensured that metabolism remained high and body temperature stayed stable during cold weather activities. Food sharing within groups followed complex social protocols that ensured everyone received adequate nutrition for survival while recognizing the contributions of successful hunters and gatherers. The individual who brought down a mammoth received honor and choice portions, but the entire group benefited from the kill. This sharing system created social bonds while ensuring group survival during the periods when some individuals might be unable to contribute to food procurement. Cooking techniques were adapted to maximize caloric extraction from available foods. Slow cooking methods that broke down tough connective tissues made more nutrients available while creating warming stews and broths that provided both calories and hydration. Roasting techniques concentrated flavors and nutrients while creating the hot meals that provided immediate warming during cold weather. The preparation of high-energy travel foods allowed for extended hunting expeditions during winter months. Pemmican, a mixture of dried meat, rendered fat, and preserved berries, provided portable nutrition that could sustain hunters for days away from base camps. These concentrated foods were so nutritionally complete that they could serve as the sole food source for extended periods without causing malnutrition. Storage systems had to protect food from both spoilage and theft by other humans or scavenging animals. Underground caches lined with stones and sealed with heavy covers kept supplies safe from most threats, while maintaining the cold temperatures necessary for preservation. The location of these caches was carefully memorized, and often marked with subtle indicators that group members could recognize while remaining invisible to outsiders. As our ancestors consume the rich, warming foods that will carry them through another brutal winter, we see that survival in the Ice Age required not just courage and endurance, but also sophisticated knowledge of nutrition, food chemistry, and preservation techniques that wouldn't be scientifically understood for thousands of years to come. The fire has burned low, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls as the last embers glow like tiny stars in the gathering darkness. Outside, the wind howls with a ferocity that seems determined to find every crack and crevice. But inside the shelter, something more powerful than flame provides warmth. The shared body heat of humans pressed close together, breathing in unison, creating a cocoon of survival that has sustained our species through countless harsh nights. Communal sleeping wasn't simply a matter of convenience or social preference. It was a biological necessity that meant the difference between waking up alive or never waking up at all. When external temperatures drop below freezing and artificial heat sources are limited, the human body's ability to maintain core temperature depends heavily on external heat sources. A person sleeping alone in sub-freezing conditions can lose body heat faster than metabolism can replace it, leading to hypothermia and death even when wrapped in the warmest available furs. But when multiple bodies share the same sleeping space, they create a microclimate that can be 20 to 30 degrees warmer than the surrounding air. Archaeological evidence from Paleolithic sites across Europe shows sleeping areas designed specifically for group use, flattened, prepared spaces large enough for entire families or small bands, with bedding arrangements that maximized shared warmth while providing individual comfort. The science behind communal sleeping reveals why this practice was so effective. Each human body generates approximately 100 watts of heat at rest, roughly equivalent to a bright incandescent light bulb. When multiple bodies are positioned close together, this heat accumulates in the shared space, creating a warm zone that can sustain comfortable temperatures even when the surrounding environment is life-threateningly cold. The positioning of bodies within sleeping groups followed sophisticated principles that maximized warmth distribution while ensuring everyone's safety and comfort. Children and elderly individuals who had more difficulty maintaining body temperature were placed in the center of the group where they could benefit from heat generated by multiple adults. Larger, stronger individuals positioned themselves on the outside, serving as thermal barriers against the cold while benefiting from the accumulated warmth of the group. Archaeological analysis of sleeping areas reveals evidence of deliberate preparation that enhanced the effectiveness of communal sleeping. Thick layers of dried grasses, mosses, and soft plant materials created insulation barriers between bodies and cold ground. Animal hides were layered to create sleeping surfaces that trapped body heat while providing cushioning against hard stone floors. The social dynamics of communal sleeping created bonds between individuals that went far beyond simple survival cooperation. Modern neuroscience research has shown that physical contact and synchronized breathing patterns trigger the release of oxytocin and other bonding hormones that create feelings of trust, safety, and emotional connection. Night after night of shared warmth created relationships so strong that groups would risk their lives to protect one another. The practice also had profound effects on sleep quality and mental health. The sounds of other people breathing, the subtle movements and adjustments of sleeping companions, and the constant awareness of protective presence all contributed to a sense of security that allowed for deeper, more restorative sleep. Modern sleep studies have shown that people who sleep in the presence of trusted companions often experience less anxiety and more consistent sleep cycles. Children born into these communal sleeping arrangements developed attachment patterns and social skills that differed significantly from those raised in individual sleeping environments. The constant physical contact and shared warmth created secure attachment bonds not just with parents, but with extended family and community members, fostering the social cooperation that was essential for group survival. The timing and rituals surrounding communal sleep became important cultural practices that strengthened group cohesion. As darkness fell and the day's activities wound down, families and band members would gather in sleeping areas, sharing the day's experiences, planning for tomorrow's activities, and engaging in social grooming behaviors that reinforced relationships and resolved conflicts before they could threaten group unity. Temperature regulation within sleeping groups was a learned skill that required coordination and mutual awareness. If one person became too warm and moved away from the group, it could create cold spots that affected everyone's comfort. If someone was cold and pressed too close to others, it could disrupt sleep for multiple people. Over time, individuals learned to adjust their positioning and bedding to maintain optimal temperatures for the entire group. The selection of sleeping companions within larger bands followed social hierarchies and relationship patterns that reflected the group's structure. Mated pairs typically slept together, children slept near their parents, and individuals with special relationships, hunting partners, close friends, or family members, often positioned themselves near each other. These sleeping arrangements reinforced social bonds while ensuring that warmth distribution was optimized for group survival. Privacy, as we understand it today, was largely unknown in Paleolithic sleeping arrangements. The intimacy of shared breath, shared warmth, and shared space created a different relationship with personal boundaries and individual space. This closeness fostered communication patterns, conflict resolution skills, and social awareness that were essential for maintaining group harmony in high-stress survival situations. The transition from communal to individual sleeping, which occurred much later in human history, represents one of the most significant changes in human social behavior. The ability to sleep alone, made possible by improved heating technology and more sophisticated shelter construction, fundamentally altered human relationships and social structures in ways that continue to influence modern society. Seasonal variations in sleeping arrangements reflected changing environmental conditions and survival requirements. During the coldest months, entire extended families might share single sleeping areas, maximizing warmth conservation and resource sharing. As temperatures moderated, smaller groups might separate into family units while still maintaining the communal sleeping practices that had proven so effective during the harshest periods. The knowledge of how to create effective communal sleeping arrangements was passed down through generations, with experienced individuals teaching younger community members how to position bodies for maximum warmth, how to arrange bedding for optimal insulation, and how to coordinate group movements to maintain comfortable temperatures throughout the night. As our ancestors settle into their shared sleeping space, surrounded by the warmth of family and friends, breathing together in the rhythm of survival, we witness one of humanity's most fundamental survival innovations, the recognition that in the face of overwhelming natural forces, our greatest strength lies not in individual resilience but in our ability to support one another, share resources, and create collective solutions to the challenges that threaten our existence. The fire burns lower as night deepens, and the dancing flames begin to cast strange shapes on the rough stone walls of the cave. A flicker here becomes the silhouette of a running mammoth, a shadow there transforms into the prowling form of a cave lion, and suddenly the bare walls come alive with an entire world of moving creatures that seem to breathe and hunt and flee across the rock surfaces. For the humans huddled around the fire, these dancing shadows are more than mere optical illusions. They are the birthplace of human imagination, the first glimpse into worlds beyond the harsh reality of Ice Age survival. Archaeological evidence from caves across Europe reveals that our Paleolithic ancestors were deeply affected by the shadow plays created by firelight on cave walls. At sites like Lascaux in France and Altamira in Spain, prehistoric artists didn't simply paint random images on flat surfaces. They carefully selected areas of cave walls where natural rock formations would enhance the three-dimensional effect of their artwork when illuminated by flickering firelight. The interplay between flame and shadow created humanity's first cinema, a constantly changing display of moving images that sparked the development of symbolic thinking and artistic expression. Modern experiments with prehistoric painting techniques have shown that many cave paintings were designed specifically to be viewed by firelight, with the movement of flames creating animation effects that made painted animals appear to run, breathe, and move across the cave walls. But the shadows cast by firelight did more than entertain. They fundamentally changed how humans understood reality and their place in the world. In the dancing shapes created by flame and darkness, our ancestors began to see spirits, ancestors, and supernatural forces that existed beyond the physical world they could touch and measure. These shadow visions became the foundation for humanity's first religious and spiritual beliefs. Children were particularly susceptible to the magic of fire shadows, and their reactions helped shape the mythological systems that would guide human behavior for thousands of years. A child's frightened cry at a particularly threatening shadow might lead adults to create protective rituals designed to ward off the evil spirits that seemed to emerge from the darkness. A child's delight at a beautiful shadow pattern might inspire stories about benevolent spirits that watched over the group during dangerous times. The seasonal changes in shadow patterns caused by variations in fire size and fuel availability created cyclical mythological systems that connected supernatural beliefs to the rhythm of the natural world. During the abundant summer months when large, bright fires were possible, the shadows might be seen as powerful and protective. During the lean winter months when fuel was scarce and fires burned low, the weaker shadows might be interpreted as signs that the spirit world was weakening, requiring human intervention through ritual and sacrifice. Different types of fuel created different shadow qualities that influenced the stories and beliefs they inspired. Resinous woods that burned with bright, crackling flames created sharp, dramatic shadows that might represent powerful, dangerous spirits. Slower burning hardwoods that produced steady, gentle flames created softer shadows that could be seen as peaceful ancestors or protective deities. The social dynamics of shadow interpretation became important aspects of Paleolithic culture. Elders who were skilled at reading meaning into shadow patterns gained status as spiritual leaders and advisors. Their ability to find guidance and warnings in the movement of firelight shadows made them valuable members of the community whose wisdom could influence hunting decisions, migration routes, and social behavior. Group storytelling sessions around evening fires became opportunities for creative interpretation of shadow patterns. A shadow that resembled a bison might inspire a story about successful hunting, while a shadow that looked like a human figure might become a tale about ancestors or tribal heroes. These stories, repeated night after night, became the oral traditions that preserved cultural knowledge and values across generations. The psychological effects of spending hours each night watching shadow patterns were profound. The human brain's pattern recognition systems, evolved to detect predators and prey in natural environments, began to find meaningful shapes and movements in the random play of light and shadow. This enhanced pattern recognition ability had survival benefits during daylight hours, when the ability to spot camouflaged animals or recognize threatening situations could mean the difference between life and death. The development of symbolic thinking, sparked by shadow interpretation, led to advances in communication and abstract reasoning that distinguished humans from other species. The ability to see meaning in shadow patterns required the same cognitive skills needed to understand that a drawing on a cave wall represented a real animal, or that a carved figure could embody spiritual significance. Shadow play also influenced the development of early artistic techniques. Artists learned to use the natural contours of cave walls to enhance the three-dimensional effects of their paintings, positioning images where shadows would create movement and depth when viewed by firelight. This collaboration between natural rock formations, artificial pigments, and moving light sources created artistic effects that wouldn't be matched until modern times. The fear generated by threatening shadow patterns served important survival functions by keeping individuals alert and ready to respond to danger. A person who had spent hours watching shadow predators hunt across cave walls was more likely to remain vigilant during actual hunting or travel activities. The imagination exercises provided by shadow watching served as mental rehearsals for real-world survival situations. Different cultural groups developed distinct shadow interpretation traditions based on their local environments and survival challenges. Groups that hunted mammoths might see mammoth spirits in fire shadows, while groups that dealt primarily with reindeer herds might interpret the same shadows as reindeer spirits. These differences in shadow mythology became part of the cultural identity that distinguished one group from another. The transition from shadow watching to deliberate shadow manipulation represents one of humanity's first steps toward theatrical performance. Individuals learned to position themselves between the fire and the wall to create deliberate shadow shapes, using their bodies and hands to tell stories and convey information through shadow puppetry techniques that were remarkably similar to those still used in traditional cultures today. The long winter nights provided extended opportunities for shadow watching and interpretation, leading to increasingly complex mythological systems during the coldest months. The stories and beliefs developed during these periods of intensive shadow observation influenced decision-making and behavior patterns that affected the group's survival chances when spring returned and active hunting and gathering resumed. As the shadows continued to dance across the cave walls and our ancestors find meaning, beauty, and spiritual significance in the interplay of light and darkness, we witness the birth of human imagination, the cognitive capacity that would eventually create art, religion, science, and all the other distinctly human achievements that separate our species from the rest of the animal kingdom. The winter solstice approaches, and the darkness seems to swallow the world whole. For months, the sun has traced a lower and lower arc across the southern sky, until now it barely crests the horizon before disappearing again into the endless night. In the depths of this cosmic darkness, when it seems the cold might triumph forever, the humans gathered in their shelter perform a ritual that connects them to forces greater than their own survival. They tend a sacred flame that represents their defiance of the dying light and their faith in its eventual return. Archaeological evidence from sites across the northern hemisphere reveals that Paleolithic peoples developed sophisticated ceremonial practices centered around fire, particularly during the darkest months of winter. These weren't simply practical fires maintained for warmth and cooking, but deliberately constructed ritual flames that served spiritual and psychological functions essential for group survival during the most challenging periods of the year. At Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, excavations have uncovered what appears to be a ceremonial fire site dating back 26,000 years, surrounded by carefully arranged mammoth bones and containing evidence of special fuels that wouldn't have been used in ordinary cooking fires. The presence of ochre, rare minerals, and carved figurines near these hearths suggests that fire tending had evolved into a complex religious practice with deep spiritual significance. The transformation of fire from a survival tool into a sacred force represented a fundamental shift in human consciousness. No longer was flame simply a means of staying warm or cooking food. It had become a bridge between the physical world of immediate needs and the spiritual realm of hopes, fears, and beliefs about forces beyond human control. The sacred fire embodied humanity's first attempts to understand and influence the cosmic forces that governed their existence. The selection of fuel for sacred fires followed principles entirely different from those used for practical flames. Instead of choosing wood based on heat output or burning duration, ritual fires were fed materials chosen for their symbolic properties, their rarity, or their connection to significant events. A piece of wood from a tree struck by lightning might be saved for months before being added to a solstice fire. Bones from particularly successful hunts might be burned to honor the spirits that had provided the game. The rituals surrounding sacred fire maintenance created some of humanity's first formal religious practices. Special individuals, often elders with extensive knowledge of fire-tending techniques, were designated as fire keepers, responsible for maintaining the ceremonial flames according to traditional procedures passed down through generations. These fire keepers held positions of respect and authority within their groups, their spiritual responsibilities making them essential figures in community survival. The timing of fire ceremonies was carefully coordinated with astronomical events and seasonal changes that had profound impacts on survival prospects. The winter solstice fire, lit when the sun reached its weakest point, represented humanity's faith that light and warmth would return despite the apparent triumph of cold and darkness. These ceremonies provided psychological anchors that helped groups maintain hope and cooperation during the most difficult months. Offering rituals developed around sacred fires, with individuals contributing precious materials to feed the flames as a form of communication with spiritual forces. A hunter might offer a portion of his best spear point to ensure success in future hunts. A woman might contribute rare beads or carved ornaments to ask for protection for her children. These offerings represented significant material sacrifices that demonstrated the depth of spiritual belief and the importance of maintaining proper relationships with supernatural forces. The social dynamics of fire ceremonies strengthened group cohesion in ways that were essential for survival. Participation in ritual activities required coordination, cooperation, and shared belief systems that unified individuals behind common goals and values. Groups that maintained strong ceremonial traditions were more likely to work together effectively during crises and less likely to fragment due to internal conflicts. The location of sacred fires was chosen with careful consideration of symbolic as well as practical factors. Many were positioned at cave mouths or other liminal spaces that seemed to exist between the human world of the shelter interior and the wild world of the landscape beyond. This positioning emphasized the fire's role as a mediator between human needs and natural forces, a beacon of civilization surrounded by wilderness. The artifacts associated with sacred fires reveal the sophisticated artistic and crafts traditions that developed around ceremonial practices. Carved figurines, decorated tools, and ornamental objects found near ritual hearths show levels of skill and creativity that went far beyond what was needed for simple survival. These objects represent some of humanity's first art created specifically for spiritual rather than practical purposes. The psychological effects of participating in fire ceremonies were profound and long-lasting. The shared focus on tending a sacred flame created meditative states that reduced stress, promoted group bonding, and provided mental frameworks for dealing with uncertainty and fear. The rhythmic activities of feeding fires, arranging fuel, and maintaining optimal flame conditions created trance-like states that many participants interpreted as direct communication with spiritual forces. Different groups developed distinct ceremonial traditions that reflected their unique environments and cultural histories. Coastal peoples might incorporate seashells and driftwood into their sacred fires, while mountain dwellers might use rare minerals and alpine plants. These variations in ritual practice became markers of cultural identity that distinguished one group from another and created the foundations of tribal traditions. The preservation of sacred fire knowledge required sophisticated educational systems that ensured essential spiritual practices would survive even if key individuals died or became incapacitated. Young people were gradually initiated into fire-keeping responsibilities through apprenticeship programs that combined practical training with spiritual instruction, creating the first formal systems of religious education. The integration of sacred fire practices with astronomical observation led to the development of primitive calendars and timekeeping systems that helped groups coordinate their activities with seasonal cycles. Firekeepers became responsible not just for maintaining flames, but also for tracking the movements of sun, moon, and stars that determined the timing of ceremonies and other important activities. The sacred fires served as focal points for community decision-making processes, with important discussions and group planning sessions held in the presence of ceremonial flames. The shared spiritual significance of these fires created environments where conflicts could be resolved, consensus could be reached, and collective decisions could be made with the blessing of supernatural forces. As the sacred flame burns through another endless winter night, tended by reverent hands and fed with offerings that represent the deepest hopes and fears of our ancestors, we witness the birth of human spirituality, the recognition that survival requires more than just physical adaptations, but also spiritual resources that connect individuals to their communities and their communities to the larger forces that govern existence. The wind has shifted from the south, and with it comes a warning that experienced Ice Age survivors can read as clearly as written words. The temperature is about to plummet even further, and the precious fuel supply that keeps the fires burning and the group alive is running dangerously low. In this treeless landscape of frozen steppes and tundra, where a single miscalculation about fuel consumption can mean death for an entire band, humans have learned to find combustible materials in places and forms that would seem impossible to anyone unfamiliar with the desperate innovations born of extreme cold. The scarcity of traditional wood fuel in Ice Age environments drove some of humanity's most creative survival innovations. When trees were rare or completely absent, our ancestors learned to burn materials that most modern people would never consider as fuel sources. Animal bones, dried with care and cracked to expose the marrow-rich interior, could burn with surprising heat and duration. The long bones of mammoths and other large animals, when properly prepared, could sustain fires for hours while producing temperatures hot enough for cooking and metalworking. Archaeological evidence from sites across the northern steppes reveals sophisticated bone fuel processing techniques that required extensive knowledge of animal anatomy and combustion principles. Bones had to be thoroughly cleaned of all flesh and dried completely to prevent dangerous flare-ups or toxic smoke. Different bones provided different burning characteristics. Ribs burned quickly and hot for starting fires, while dense leg bones provided long-lasting coals that could maintain heat through long winter nights. The rendering of animal fat into fuel created portable energy sources that could be stored for extended periods and used when other fuel sources were unavailable. Fat-soaked wicks made from plant fibers or animal hair could burn steadily for hours, providing both heat and light in situations where larger fires were impossible or impractical. These primitive oil lamps allowed for continued activity during the darkest periods and provided emergency heating when main fires failed. The collection and processing of dried animal dung became another crucial survival skill in environments where traditional fuel was scarce. Mammoth dung, when properly dried, burned cleanly and provided substantial heat output. The size of mammoth herds meant that large quantities of this fuel were available in areas where the great beasts grazed, creating opportunities for groups brave enough to venture into dangerous territory where predators also gathered to hunt the herds. Resinous materials from evergreen trees provided high-energy fuel sources that burned with intense heat and distinctive aromatic properties. Pine pitch, spruce resin, and birch tar could be collected during warmer months and stored for winter use. These materials were particularly valuable because small quantities could dramatically increase the heat output and burning duration of other fuels, making them essential components of survival fuel management systems. The careful management of fuel resources required long-term planning and sophisticated conservation techniques that tested the group's ability to balance immediate needs against future survival requirements. Fuel had to be gathered during favorable weather conditions, processed and prepared during spare time, and stored in ways that protected it from moisture, theft, and accidental loss. These activities required coordination between individuals and careful allocation of labor resources. Experimental burning techniques allowed groups to maximize the efficiency of limited fuel supplies. Controlled airflow methods using animal hide bellows or careful arrangement of fuel materials could increase combustion temperatures while extending burning duration. The construction of reflective surfaces using flat stones or metal objects concentrated heat output and reduced the amount of fuel needed to maintain comfortable temperatures. The psychological stress of managing scarce fuel resources created social dynamics that could either strengthen group cohesion or tear communities apart. Individuals who contributed to fuel gathering and processing gained status and respect, while those who consumed more than their fair share faced social sanctions. The sharing of fuel resources became a test of group solidarity and individual commitment to collective survival. Different fuel sources required different fire management techniques, and groups developed specialized knowledge about how to burn various materials most effectively. Bone fires needed different airflow patterns than wood fires. Fat-based fuels required careful temperature control to prevent dangerous flare-ups. Dried plant materials had to be burned in specific ways to maximize heat output while minimizing smoke production. The timing of fuel consumption followed complex patterns that balanced energy needs with resource availability. Large, hot fires might be built during the coldest parts of winter nights when heat requirements were highest, while smaller, more efficient fires might be maintained during periods when fuel was especially scarce. These decisions required accurate weather prediction and careful calculation of fuel reserves. Storage systems for various fuel types had to protect materials from environmental damage while keeping them accessible for use. Underground caches lined with stones preserved fuel supplies through seasonal changes. Above-ground storage areas used carefully constructed covers and drainage systems to prevent moisture damage. The location and construction of these storage systems often determined whether groups survived through difficult periods. The innovation of composite fuels, combining different materials to create burning mixtures with superior properties, represented advanced understanding of combustion chemistry. Mixtures of fat, dried plant materials, and bone fragments could burn longer and hotter than any single component alone. These fuel combinations required experimentation and knowledge sharing between individuals with different areas of expertise. Trading networks developed around fuel resources, with groups in areas rich in particular materials exchanging their surplus for other types of fuel or essential supplies. These early trade relationships were often maintained over long distances and multiple generations, creating the first economic systems based on resource specialization and exchange. Quality control in fuel preparation was essential for safety and effectiveness. Poorly prepared bone fuel could produce toxic smoke or dangerous flare-ups. Inadequately dried plant materials could fail to burn when needed most. Fat that hadn't been properly rendered could spoil and become unusable. The knowledge of how to prepare and test fuel quality was crucial survival information. The development of kindling and fire-starting materials required specialized knowledge of which substances would ignite easily and reliably under different conditions. Dry fungus, certain tree barks, and processed plant fibers could be prepared in advance and stored for use in emergency fire-starting situations. These materials were often treated with oils or resins to improve their ignition properties. Fuel conservation techniques during fire use included banking coals to preserve heat through periods when active flames weren't needed, using reflective surfaces to maximize heat distribution, and carefully controlling airflow to achieve optimal burning efficiency. These techniques could extend the useful life of fuel supplies by significant amounts while maintaining adequate heating for survival needs. As our ancestors carefully tend their fires with precious fuel gathered through ingenuity, hard work, and deep knowledge of their harsh environment, we see that survival in extreme conditions requires not just courage and endurance, but also the kind of innovative thinking and careful resource management that would later become the foundation of human technological civilization. Dawn breaks gray and bitter across the frozen landscape, and the time has come to break camp and move toward the winter hunting grounds where the reindeer herds are said to be gathering. But leaving the shelter means abandoning the warm, protective fire that has sustained the group through countless dark nights, unless that fire can somehow be carried along on the journey. In the careful hands of experienced firekeepers, glowing coals are nestled into specially prepared containers that will preserve the precious flame through miles of travel, wind, and snow, carrying the essence of warmth and light like a portable sun that never sets. The transportation of fire represented one of the most critical survival technologies developed by Ice Age peoples. Without the ability to carry flame from place to place, groups would be trapped in single locations or forced to risk death by attempting to create new fires in potentially impossible conditions. The techniques for preserving and transporting coals required sophisticated understanding of combustion science, materials technology, and the physics of heat conservation. Archaeological evidence from nomadic sites across northern Europe and Asia reveals the tools and containers used for fire transport. Specially prepared sections of animal horn, hollowed and fitted with tight-fitting lids, could preserve glowing coals for extended periods while protecting them from wind and moisture. Birch bark containers, layered and waterproofed with animal fat, provided lightweight alternatives that could be carried easily during long migrations. The preparation of coals for transport was a complex process that required precise timing and technique. The coals had to be hot enough to survive the journey, but not so hot that they would burn through their containers or consume all available oxygen. Different types of fuel created coals with different transportation properties. Hardwood charcoal lasted longer, but required more careful temperature management, while softwood coals were easier to transport, but burned out more quickly. Insulation materials for coal transport were selected based on their ability to preserve heat while preventing dangerous combustion. Layers of moss, dried grass, and animal hair created thermal barriers that kept coals at optimal temperatures. Sand and ash could be used to control oxygen flow and prevent coals from burning too rapidly. The arrangement of these materials required knowledge that was often closely guarded and passed down through specialized fire-keeping lineages. The social organization of fire transport created specialized roles within traveling groups. Designated fire carriers were responsible for monitoring coal containers, adjusting insulation as needed, and ensuring that the precious flames survived the journey. These individuals often traveled in protected positions within the group, surrounded by warriors and hunters who understood that losing the fire could doom everyone to death in the cold. Emergency fire starting techniques were essential backup systems for groups carrying transported coals. Even the most carefully prepared coal containers could fail due to extreme weather, accidents, or other unforeseen circumstances. Fire carriers maintained supplies of tinder, kindling, and fire-starting tools that could create new flames if the transported coals were lost. though this was always considered a last resort due to the difficulty and uncertainty involved. The timing of fire transport was coordinated with travel schedules and weather patterns to maximize the chances of successful preservation. Coals were typically prepared during the warmest part of the day when handling was easier and containers could be sealed without creating dangerous condensation. Travel routes were planned to minimize exposure to high winds and precipitation that could threaten coal survival. Different cultural groups developed distinct fire transport technologies based on their environments and available materials. Arctic peoples used techniques adapted to extreme cold and wind, while forest dwellers developed methods suited to humid conditions and different fuel types. These regional variations in fire transport technology became part of cultural identity and were often closely guarded secrets that provided survival advantages over competing groups. The fear of losing fire during transport created some of the most powerful psychological pressures experienced by nomadic Ice Age peoples. The knowledge that group survival depended entirely on the preservation of a few glowing coals created intense anxiety and careful attention to every detail of the transport process. Stories and myths about groups that lost their fire and perished in the cold served as powerful warnings about the importance of proper firekeeping techniques. Backup systems were essential components of any fire transport operation. Multiple containers might be used simultaneously to reduce the risk of total fire loss. Different individuals might carry separate coal supplies so that an accident affecting one firekeeper wouldn't doom the entire group. These redundant systems required additional resources and labor, but were considered essential investments in group survival. The revival of transported coals into full flames required specific techniques and materials that had to be prepared in advance. Carefully dried tinder, properly arranged kindling, and knowledge of optimal airflow patterns were all necessary to transform glowing coals back into the warming fires that meant life in the frozen wilderness. The moment when transported coals were successfully revived into new flames was often celebrated as a triumph over death itself. Weather conditions during transport created varying levels of challenge that required adaptive techniques and flexible planning. High winds demanded better container sealing and additional protective measures. Wet conditions required waterproof coverings and modified insulation systems. Extreme cold could cause containers to crack or insulation materials to freeze, requiring emergency repairs and adjustments. The portable fire technology developed by Ice Age peoples allowed for the expansion of human populations into previously uninhabitable territories. Groups that could reliably transport fire could venture into areas where fire-making materials were scarce or environmental conditions made creating new flames extremely difficult. This technological capability was directly linked to human migration patterns and the eventual colonization of the entire planet. Loading and unloading procedures for coal transport were carefully standardized to minimize the risk of accidents or fire loss. These procedures were practiced repeatedly until they became automatic responses that could be performed quickly even under stressful conditions. The ability to rapidly establish warming fires after long, cold journeys often meant the difference between successful migration and disaster. Quality control systems were developed to test coal containers and insulation materials before critical journeys. Firekeepers learned to identify signs that containers were failing, insulation was deteriorating, or coal quality was declining. These diagnostic skills allowed for preventive maintenance and replacement of transport systems before catastrophic failures occurred. The knowledge and skills required for successful fire transport created specialized educational systems within Ice Age societies. Young people who showed aptitude for firekeeping were trained through apprenticeships that could last for years. This specialized knowledge was considered so valuable that firekeepers often held positions of high status and authority within their groups. Communication systems were developed to coordinate fire transport activities during group movements. Signals and calls allowed firekeepers to communicate their status to group leaders and other members. Warning systems alerted the group when fire transport was in danger and emergency measures were needed. As our ancestors carefully tend their portable flames through another dangerous journey across the frozen landscape, carrying with them the warmth and light that will mean survival in their new camp, we witness one of humanity's most crucial innovations, the technology that allowed our species to become truly mobile, to explore and colonize new territories, and to maintain the continuity of culture and survival knowledge across vast distances and changing environments. The fire has settled into its deepest rhythm of the night, no longer crackling with the sharp sounds of fresh fuel, but breathing with the steady pulse of well-seasoned coals. The flames dance lower now, casting a hypnotic orange glow that seems to pulse in harmony with the heartbeats of those gathered around it. In this warm circle of light, as consciousness begins to drift toward sleep, the boundary between waking and dreaming becomes as fluid as the shadows that play across the cave walls, and the human mind enters a realm where survival wisdom and spiritual insight merge in ways that would shape our species' understanding of reality for thousands of years to come. The relationship between firelight and human consciousness was far more profound than simple illumination. Modern neuroscience research has revealed that exposure to flickering light in the 120 Hz range, exactly the frequency range produced by campfires, can induce altered states of consciousness similar to those achieved through meditation or rhythmic drumming. For Ice Age people spending hours each evening in the glow of dancing flames, these altered consciousness states were a regular part of their psychological landscape. Archaeological evidence from sites like Chauvet Cave in France suggests that Paleolithic peoples deliberately used firelight to enhance visionary experiences. The placement of painted animals on cave walls was often coordinated with natural rock formations that would create three-dimensional effects when viewed by flickering firelight. These artistic installations were designed not just to be seen, but to be experienced in altered states of consciousness, where the boundaries between artwork and reality became blurred. The physiology of firelight exposure created specific changes in brain chemistry that influenced dream patterns and sleep cycles. The warm, red spectrum light produced by wood fires stimulated the production of melatonin, the hormone responsible for regulating sleep cycles and promoting deep restorative rest. This natural light therapy helped Ice Age peoples maintain healthy sleep patterns despite the extreme light-dark cycles of high-latitude winters. Group dreaming sessions around fires became important cultural activities that strengthened social bonds while providing guidance for survival decisions. Individuals would share their dreams with the group, and experienced elders would interpret these visions for meaning related to hunting prospects, weather predictions, or spiritual guidance. These dream-sharing sessions created collective wisdom systems that combined individual psychological insights with group survival knowledge. The content of firelight-induced dreams often reflected the daily survival challenges and concerns of Ice Age life. Dreams about animal behavior could provide insights into hunting strategies. Visions of weather patterns might offer guidance for seasonal planning. Dreams about ancestors or spiritual figures could provide psychological support during difficult periods. These dream experiences were treated as valuable sources of information rather than mere fantasy. The timing of dream activities was carefully coordinated with fire management and group schedules. The deepest trance states typically occurred during the period when fires burned lowest and most steadily, usually in the hours before dawn when fuel had been carefully banked to provide steady heat without active flames. This timing allowed for maximum visionary experience while maintaining essential warmth through the coldest part of the night. Different fuel types created different qualities of firelight that influenced the character and intensity of trance experiences. Resinous woods that burned with bright, active flames created energetic trance states that might inspire visions of hunting success or victory in conflicts. Hardwoods that burned with steady, gentle flames promoted calmer, visionary states that might provide guidance about healing, relationships, or spiritual matters. The social roles associated with dream interpretation created specialized positions within Ice Age communities. Individuals who showed particular skill at remembering, interpreting, or inducing significant dreams often became spiritual advisors, whose guidance influenced group decisions about hunting, migration, and conflict resolution. These dream specialists held positions of respect and authority based on their ability to access and interpret information from altered consciousness states. Training systems were developed to enhance dreaming abilities and improve dream recall among community members. Young people who showed aptitude for visionary experiences were taught techniques for entering trance states, remembering dream content, and interpreting symbolic imagery. This specialized education created the first formal systems of spiritual and psychological training in human society. The integration of dream wisdom with practical survival knowledge created decision-making processes that combined rational planning with intuitive guidance. Hunting expeditions might be planned based on both observable animal behavior and dream visions of successful hunts. Migration routes might be chosen based on both geographical knowledge and spiritual guidance received in dreams. Physical preparations for enhanced dreaming included dietary modifications, positioning around fires, and use of natural substances that could influence consciousness states. Certain plants known for their psychoactive properties were sometimes burned in fires to create mild alterations in consciousness that enhanced visionary experiences. These practices required extensive botanical knowledge and careful dosage control to avoid dangerous effects. The artistic expression inspired by firelight visions created some of humanity's first abstract and symbolic artwork. The flowing, dynamic images painted on cave walls often reflected the visual patterns and symbolic content experienced during firelight trance states. These artworks served as permanent records of visionary experiences that could be shared with others and preserved for future generations. Seasonal variations in firelight dreaming reflected changing survival pressures and environmental conditions. During the darkest winter months, when fires burned continuously for extended periods, dream activities reached their peak intensity and cultural importance. Summer months with shorter fire exposure typically produced fewer significant visionary experiences, creating annual cycles of spiritual activity that coordinated with natural rhythms. The healing applications of firelight trance states provided psychological and possibly physical therapeutic benefits that enhanced survival in stressful environments. The relaxation and altered consciousness induced by firelight exposure could reduce anxiety, promote healing sleep, and provide mental frameworks for coping with trauma and loss. These therapeutic benefits made firelight dreaming an important component of Ice Age healthcare systems. Communication with the deceased through firelight visions provided psychological support systems that helped groups cope with loss and maintain cultural continuity. Dreams featuring deceased family members or tribal leaders were interpreted as ongoing guidance from ancestors who continued to watch over and protect the living. These ancestor communication systems created spiritual continuity that strengthened group identity and cooperation. The development of symbolic languages based on dream imagery created some of humanity's first abstract communication systems. Symbols and images that appeared frequently in firelight visions became part of shared cultural vocabularies that could convey complex ideas about spiritual matters, psychological states, and survival wisdom. These symbolic systems were precursors to written language and formal artistic traditions. As our ancestors drift toward sleep, in the hypnotic glow of their carefully tended fires, their minds opening to visions and dreams that will guide their survival decisions and deepen their understanding of the mysterious world around them. We witness the birth of human consciousness as we know it today, the remarkable capacity to find meaning, wisdom, and spiritual insight in the interplay between external reality and internal experience. The long winter night is ending at last. Outside the shelter, the first hints of dawn touch the eastern horizon, and though the cold remains bitter, there's something different in the air. A subtle shift in wind patterns, a barely perceptible change in the quality of light that speaks to ancient instincts about the turning of seasons. The fire that has burned through this endless night is the same fire that warmed the first humans to venture into the frozen north, the same flame that will one day forge the tools that build civilizations, and the same light that still flickers in the hearts of their descendants who have never forgotten the lesson learned in the depths of the Ice Age. That survival depends not on individual strength, but on the ability to harness, share, and preserve the forces that sustain life itself. The mastery of fire that began as a desperate survival strategy in Ice Age caves became the foundation for every technological advancement that would follow in human history. The controlled combustion that once meant the difference between life and death in a Paleolithic winter shelter would eventually power steam engines, forge steel for skyscrapers, and launch rockets toward the stars. But the fundamental principles remained the same: the careful management of fuel, the precise control of heat, and the understanding that fire could transform raw materials into tools that expanded human capabilities. Archaeological evidence shows that the fire-keeping traditions developed during the Pleistocene epoch were passed down through thousands of generations with remarkable consistency. The same hearth designs, fuel management techniques, and social organizations that sustained Ice Age communities can be found in traditional cultures around the world, from the Arctic peoples of Alaska and Siberia to the highland tribes of South America. These cultural continuities demonstrate that the survival knowledge gained during humanity's most challenging period became permanent parts of our species' collective wisdom. The social structures created around shared fires evolved into the basic patterns of human civilization. The cooperation required to gather fuel, maintain flames, and share warmth became the foundation for more complex forms of social organization. The leadership roles filled by skilled firekeepers became the prototypes for chiefs, priests, and technical specialists. The resource-sharing systems that ensured everyone had access to warmth became the models for economic systems based on mutual aid and collective benefit. The spiritual significance of fire that emerged during the Ice Age influenced the development of religions and mythological systems that still shape human culture today. The sacred flames that once provided psychological anchor points during the darkest winter nights became the eternal flames that burn in temples and shrines around the world. The fire ceremonies that strengthened group bonds during survival crises became the rituals that mark important transitions and celebrations in modern societies. The technological innovations driven by fire mastery created a cascade of developments that transformed human capabilities. The ability to harden wooden tools with controlled heat led to more effective weapons and implements. The knowledge of which materials burned at different temperatures became the foundation for metallurgy and ceramics. The understanding of combustion chemistry that began with survival fires eventually enabled the Industrial Revolution and the modern technological world. The psychological adaptations that allowed humans to find comfort and meaning in firelight continued to influence human behavior long after the survival pressures of the Ice Age had ended. The attraction to fireplaces and candles that persists in modern homes reflects ancient programming that associates flame with safety, warmth, and social bonding. The meditative effects of watching flames continue to provide psychological benefits that our ancestors first discovered during those long winter nights. The expansion of human populations into previously uninhabitable environments was made possible by fire technology that originated during the Pleistocene. The ability to create portable warmth allowed humans to colonize the Arctic, cross frozen land bridges to new continents, and survive in environments that would have been impossible without controlled flame. Every major migration in human history was enabled by fire-keeping knowledge that traced its origins to Ice Age innovations. The educational systems that preserved fire-keeping knowledge became the models for all subsequent forms of learning and cultural transmission. The apprenticeship programs that trained young firekeepers in complex technical skills became the foundation for craft specialization and professional training. The oral traditions that preserved survival wisdom became the basis for storytelling, literature, and formal education systems. The artistic expressions inspired by firelight visions during Ice Age winters evolved into sophisticated traditions of visual art, music, and performance that continue to enrich human culture. The cave paintings created by firelight became the ancestors of all subsequent artistic traditions. The rhythmic activities associated with fire tending became the origins of music and dance. The storytelling sessions held around evening fires became the foundation for theater, literature, and all forms of narrative art. The medical and therapeutic applications of fire that began with survival needs led to advances in healthcare and healing that saved countless lives. The understanding of heat therapy, surgical cauterization, and medicinal smoke developed from basic fire use skills. The psychological benefits of firelight exposure became part of healing traditions that recognized the connection between mental and physical health. The environmental management techniques that originated with Ice Age fire use became the basis for agriculture, forestry, and landscape modification that enabled the development of permanent settlements and complex societies. The controlled burning practices that once helped hunters manage game populations became the foundation for scientific land management. The understanding of how fire could transform landscapes became essential knowledge for farmers, engineers, and urban planners. The quality control and standardization systems developed for firekeeping became models for all subsequent technological processes. The precise techniques required to maintain consistent flames led to understanding of measurement, timing, and process control that became essential for manufacturing, construction, and scientific research. The safety protocols developed for dangerous firework became the foundation for industrial safety systems. But perhaps most importantly, the fundamental lesson learned during those countless Ice Age nights, that survival depends on cooperation, sharing, and collective effort, became the cornerstone of human civilization. The recognition that individual strength was less important than group wisdom, that resources should be shared for collective benefit, and that knowledge should be preserved and transmitted for the benefit of future generations became the principles that allowed human societies to grow from small bands of survivors into complex civilizations capable of remarkable achievements. As the last embers of the night's fire settle into ash and the first light of dawn illuminates a world that has been forever changed by the human mastery of flame, we see that those ancient flames never really went out. They burned still in every furnace and engine, in every hearth and altar, and in every human heart that remembers the lesson learned in the depths of winter, that in unity there is warmth, in sharing there is abundance, and in the careful tending of essential forces lies the power to transform not just individual lives, but entire worlds. The legacy of those Ice Age flames continues to light the way forward, reminding us that our greatest strength as a species lies not in our individual abilities, but in our capacity to work together, to share knowledge and resources, and to keep alive the fires of hope, cooperation, and mutual care that first enabled our ancestors to survive the coldest nights and emerge into the warmth of a new day.